Okay, so here is a common collector amplifier or a buffer, and we want to look at the clipping of the common collector amplifier. So right now you see we have an input of 1 millivolt. So we run this and you see that we have 1 millivolt peak to peak over here on the output. We're about 1 millivolt peak to peak, a little bit off, but pretty close. If I look right here, you see it's the 1 millivolt peak to peak centered around 5 volts. So everything looks good. But then if I come in here and do like 0.3 volts, or let's do 0.5 volts until it clips. So now when I look at the output, you see the top looks good, the bottom looks clipped. Let's go to the other side of the capacitor to look at the actual voltages at the transistor. So the top voltage here is about 5 something. We have a 10 volt supply, so there's lots of voltage across the transistor. So it's definitely not going into saturation. Well, and the voltage here, you would assume would go down to 0 before it would clip, but it's clipping at like 4 volts. So is this in cutoff or not? Well, let's look at the currents. Well, rather than doing that, let's add in a resistor, and we're just doing this to make it easier to measure the current. And I'm going to come in here and make it, basically 0. So I'm going to put in 1 nano ohm. So basically 0. So then if I run this, I can look at this current. So what we see here is that the current right here is 0. Well, if the current going down is 0, then that means cutoff. So it is reaching cutoff, but it's reaching cutoff because the current goes to 0. Well, why is the current going to 0? Well, the current going to 0, so it's a clipping. So this is clipping in cutoff. And if I look at the current here, this is going up to 0.4 milliamps and down to, oh, well, it's going to clip. You would assume it would go down to negative 0.4 milliamps, but it can't because it clips. So we have to fix, so the problem is on the bottom it goes into cutoff, and cutoff is when the current through the transistor goes to 0 amps. And that's what causes the clipping.